My name is Roy Callahan, and I have spent 58 years learning that a man who builds things with his hands never really retires. He just finds smaller things to fix. I was a pipe fitter for 31 years. Steam lines, boiler systems, industrial plumbing, and factories and municipal buildings across central Ohio. I know how pressure works. I know how things that look solid on the outside can be corroding from within. How a pipe that is held for decades can fail in a single cold morning because someone ignored what was building up inside it. I wish I had applied that knowledge to my own family. Last spring, my daughter asked me to come stay with her for a few weeks. She said she was worried about me rattling around alone in the house after my knee replacement. I told her I was fine. She said she just wanted to help. I believed her. That was my first mistake. My second mistake was trusting a stack of papers I never should have touched. My third mistake, well, that one I never actually made, and the reason I didn't comes down to a woman named Lupe and the 20 minutes she spent sitting across from me at a diner counter on a Tuesday morning when I had nowhere else to go. I will tell you what she said. But first, you need to understand how I got there. My wife Ruth passed 2 years ago this past November. 41 years we were married. She was a medical transcriptionist, quiet and precise, a woman who noticed everything and said only what needed to be said. She used to joke that she spent her whole career turning a doctor's mumbling into something the world could understand, and that skill translated perfectly to living with me. She was good at making sense of things. She was the only person I ever met who could look at a situation, all its noise and confusion, and just see the shape of it plainly. After she passed, the house on Sycamore felt like a building I was caretaking rather than a home I was living in. I kept her reading chair by the window. I kept the bird feeder she always filled on Saturdays. I did those things not out of grief exactly, but out of respect, the way you maintain a piece of machinery even when it's no longer running, because something in you refuses to let it fall apart. My daughter lives about 40 minutes east of me, over in Fairborn. She married a man named Troy about 6 years ago. Troy sells commercial real estate. He wears a gold watch and laughs too loud at his own jokes and has a way of talking about money that makes it sound like breathing, like the most natural and obvious thing in the world. Like anyone who isn't talking about money is somehow falling behind. I tried to like him. For my daughter's sake, I tried hard. When she called me in April and said the doctor wanted me closer to family for the first few weeks after my knee surgery, it made sense. I had nobody at home to help me up the stairs. The physical therapist was going to come 3 times a week, and I would need someone to drive me. My daughter has a good heart. I know she does. Whatever happened, I want to be clear about that. She has a good heart. It just got squeezed into a shape I didn't recognize by the life she was trying to hold together. I packed a bag and drove over on a Sunday. The house was beautiful. They had redone everything in the last 2 years. Open concept kitchen, new hardwood floors, one of those refrigerators with a screen on it that can look up recipes. Everything was white and gray and gleaming, the kind of house that looks like it belongs to someone who has already arrived, who is done working towards something and is simply living the reward. Except I noticed the refrigerator was making a sound, a low, intermittent hum that wasn't right. I mentioned it at dinner and Troy laughed and said the warranty covered it, no big deal. I let it go. A man who fixes things for a living learns to choose his battles in other people's houses. That first evening my daughter made pasta. She was attentive, kept asking if I needed anything, fluffed the pillow behind my back. Troy poured us both a glass of wine, something with a French label he said was outstanding. And when I set mine aside because I don't really drink anymore, he looked at me the way people look at you when they've decided you're a little behind the times. After dinner, while my daughter was cleaning up, Troy settled into the chair across from me and leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. He had this way of making a conversation feel like a presentation. "Roy," he said, "I've been wanting to talk to you about something. Now that Ruth is gone, God rest her, you got that house sitting there. Paid off, right? No mortgage?" "That's right," I said. "So that's an asset. A real asset, and you're not getting any younger, no offense. The thing is, there are these equity vehicles, structured retirement tools, basically ways to unlock the value in that property and turn it into income while you're still young enough to enjoy it." I looked at him. "I like the house," I said. He smiled the way men smile when they've anticipated an objection. "Of course you do. Nobody's talking about selling. This is about optimizing, working smarter with what you've built." He produced a business card from his shirt pocket and slid it across the coffee table. It had the name of a financial services company I had never heard of. He said he had been talking to a colleague who specialized in senior asset planning, that they had put together a proposal just for my situation. that all I had to do was look it over and we could move forward. I told him I would think about it. He nodded and sat back, satisfied the way a man looks when he thinks he has already won. 3 days later, a thick envelope arrived at their house addressed to me. My daughter set it on the counter with a little smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Troy was already home, which was unusual for a Thursday afternoon. He sat down across from me while I opened it. The documents inside were 40 pages long, dense, single-spaced, full of terms like conveyance and grantor and beneficial interest. I am not a lawyer, but I am not a fool either, and I have signed enough union contracts and subcontracting agreements in my working life to know when something is trying to hide itself inside its own language. "You just need to initial here and sign on the last page," Troy said, reaching over and flipping to the back. "My colleague has already reviewed everything. It's structured to protect you." "I want to read it first," I said. Something moved across his face. Just for a second, quick as a blink. "Roy, honestly, the legal language is designed for lawyers. It's going to give you a headache. I've already had it vetted." "Then it won't hurt to wait until I've read it," I said. He laughed, but it was the wrong kind of laugh. "These things have windows. There's a rate lock on the equity product, and if we miss the submission date, we lose the rate. I'm talking a full percentage point. That's real money." I set the papers on the table. "Son," I said, and I used that word deliberately. "I have never signed anything without reading it. That's not going to change at 58. My daughter had appeared in the kitchen doorway. She was watching us with her arms folded. Her expression was something I had not seen on her face before. Not anger exactly. Something closer to worry. The particular worry of someone standing at the edge of something and hoping you don't look down. Troy stood up. "Fine, take your time, but don't sit on it too long." He walked out of the room, and I heard the back door open and close. My daughter came and sat beside me. She put her hand on mine. "Daddy, he's just trying to help. You know we're always thinking about what's best for you." I patted her hand. I told her I knew, but something in my chest had gone very still and very cold, the way a building goes quiet before a pressure failure. The next morning, my daughter drove me to my PT appointment. The physical therapy clinic was on the far side of town, a strip mall location next to a dry cleaner and a Mexican diner called Rosita's. While my daughter waited in the car, I finished my session and the therapist walked me out. As we passed the diner, an older woman was coming out the door. She was maybe 60, heavy set, with steel gray hair pulled back and the kind of permanent squint you get from decades of not bothering with sunglasses. She stopped dead. "Roy Callahan," she said. I blinked. It took me a full 3 seconds. "Lupe?" I said. "Guadalupe Mares." She had worked a front desk at the Dayton Water District office for 20 years while I was doing municipal work for the city. We hadn't spoken since I retired, but you don't forget a woman like Lupe. She remembered every contractor's name, every permit number, every time a crew was late filing paperwork. She was the kind of person who held an institution together from the front desk while the people with offices got the credit. She looked at me with a measuring look. "You look tired," she said. "Knee surgery," I said. "How long you been in town?" "Staying over with my daughter. Over in Fairborn." Something changed in her face. Not dramatic. A careful stillness. She looked over my shoulder at the PT clinic, then back at me. "You eaten breakfast?" I had not. "Come sit with me," she said. I should have gone back to my daughter's car. I should have sent a text, said I ran into an old colleague. Be out in 10 minutes. Instead, I followed Lupe inside and we took stools at the counter, and she ordered us both coffee and the chorizo scramble without asking me what I wanted, which is exactly what she always did. We talked for a few minutes about nothing. Her retirement, her grandchildren, how the water district had gone to pieces since management turned over. And then she set her coffee cup down and looked at me sideways. "Your son-in-law," she said. "Troy, what's his name?" I looked at her. "You know I volunteer with the County Senior Services Office," she said. "Financial Exploitation Task Force. We meet once a month, go over referrals, flag patterns." She paused. "I've seen his name come up, Roy. I'm not going to tell you more than that because I don't have the details and I don't want to speak out of turn, but I am going to tell you this." She turned to face me directly. "If that man has put any papers in front of you, do not sign them until you have talked to someone who is not connected to him. Not a colleague of his. Not a referral from him. Someone independent. Do you understand what I'm saying?" My coffee sat untouched. "What kind of papers?" I said, though I already knew. "Property," she said, and the word landed in the diner like a stone in still water. I sat there for a moment. The counter was worn laminate, and there was a crack running through it that someone had tried to fill with clear epoxy. I stared at that crack for a long time. He says it's an equity vehicle, I said, some kind of retirement tool. Lupe let out a breath through her nose. That is what they always say, she said quietly. She didn't touch her food. She reached into her bag, wrote something on a napkin, and slid it to me. It was a name and a phone number. She's a legal aid attorney. She works specifically with seniors on financial matters. Completely independent. Call her today. Not tomorrow. Today. Not tomorrow. Today. I looked at the napkin. How bad is it? I said. I don't know your specifics, she said, but when I see a pattern, Roy, I name it, and I've seen this one before. She stood up, squeezed my arm once, left a 10 on the counter, and walked out. I sat there alone with my coffee until it went cold. I told my daughter my PT had run long. She didn't ask questions. That afternoon, while she was running errands and Troy was at his office, I went to the guest room and I read every single page of that 40-page document. It took me 2.5 hours. I had to look up words on my phone. I had a notepad. I made a list of every clause that I didn't fully understand, which was most of them. On page 22, buried inside a paragraph about asset conveyance and designated beneficiaries, I found it. The language was dense. But when I slowed down and read each sentence individually, pulling it apart the way you check a connection under pressure, it became clear. I was not agreeing to an investment product. I was signing over the deed to my house. The instrument was structured so that Troy's company would hold title, with a provision for me to remain in the property as a licensee, not an owner, for a period not to exceed 18 months. 18 months. And there was a clause I nearly missed, tucked inside the section on default remedies. If I failed to maintain certain conditions which were defined vaguely enough to include almost anything, the company retained the right to accelerate the termination of my license to occupy. I could be out of my own home on 90 days' notice. I sat on the edge of the guest bed and I looked at my hands for a long time. The same hands that had run pipe in a dozen factories. The same hands that held Ruth's on the last night she was conscious. There was a scar on my right thumb from a compression fitting that slipped in 2003. You carry things in your hands like that. History. Work. A life built the slow, hard way. My house was not a piece of property to me. It was the place Ruth and I brought our daughter home to from the hospital. It was the kitchen where she learned to make her grandmother's cornbread. It was the garage where I kept my tools, and the backyard where Ruth grew tomatoes every summer until the year she got too sick to garden. And even then, she sat on the back step and told me where to plant them. And I did exactly what she said. I called the number on Lupe's napkin. The attorney's name was Sandra Okafor. She answered on the second ring, which surprised me. I told her Lupe had given me her name. There was a brief pause, and then her voice shifted into a particular kind of focused calm, the way Lupe's had at the diner. Can you photograph every page of the document and send it to this email? She said. I wrote down the address. Every page, she said, even the ones that look like boilerplate, especially those. I spent 40 minutes photographing each page flat on the bedspread in the afternoon light, making sure the corners were flat and the text was readable. Then I emailed them, and I sat and I waited. Sandra called me back at 6:15 that evening. My daughter was cooking. I could hear her in the kitchen, and Troy's voice on a phone call somewhere in the back of the house. Mr. Callahan, Sandra said, what you have been presented with is an equity stripping instrument. It is structured to transfer title of your property under the representation that it is a financial planning vehicle. The language on page 22 constitutes a deed conveyance. If you had signed this, you would have lost legal ownership of your home. She paused. This is not a gray area. I asked her what my options were. You have several, she said. We can report this to the Ohio Department of Commerce, which regulates securities and financial instruments. Depending on how this company has been operating, there may be grounds for a criminal referral to the Attorney General's Elder Fraud Unit. I would also advise you to document everything, the circumstances under which the documents were presented, any verbal representations made to you about their nature, and the timeline. I told her I didn't want to make it a criminal matter if there was another way. She was quiet for a moment, respectful of that. That is your choice, she said. What I will tell you is that you need to leave that house, and you need to do it in a way that doesn't alert them that you know what this is. Can you manage that? I thought about it. Yes, I said. Good. Are there any assets or documents at the property that you need to secure before you leave? I thought about the filing cabinet in my garage on Sycamore. Ruth's documents were in there. Property records. Our wills. And then I remembered something Ruth had said to me the summer before she passed. We had been sitting on the back porch, and she had this way sometimes of saying important things as if they were casual, as if they had just floated up into conversation rather than being things she had been holding and waiting to say. "Roy," she had said, "you know I updated my estate documents after the diagnosis. I worked with a trust attorney. There are things you need to know about in the file cabinet, the green folder, second drawer. Don't let anyone make decisions about that house without looking in there first." I had nodded and said I understood, and then I had not thought about it again, because you don't. When someone you love is sick, you are not thinking about paperwork. I told Sandra there might be something in a file cabinet at my house. She said, "Find it before you do anything else." I told my daughter I was homesick. It was mostly true. I told her I needed to go back and water my plants and check the mail and pick up a few things. She looked uncertain. Troy, who was standing behind her with his arms crossed, said he'd drive me. "I'll drive myself," I said. "The PT says I can manage short distances." Troy's jaw tightened. "Roy, honestly, you shouldn't be driving yet." "I appreciate that," I said. "I'll be careful." He looked at my daughter. She looked back at him. Something passed between them that I was not supposed to notice. I got in my truck and I drove home. The house on Sycamore was exactly as I had left it. The air inside had that particular smell of a house that's been closed up. Wood and dust, and a faint trace of Ruth's lemon oil on the furniture she had polished the week before she went into the hospital and never came back out of. I stood in the hallway for a moment. I did not feel sad exactly. I felt oriented, like a compass that has been held near a magnet for days and has finally been set back down on a flat surface and is finding north again. The garage was cool and quiet. I found the green folder in the second drawer of the file cabinet, exactly where Ruth had said it would be. I sat down on the work stool and I opened it. There was a trust document. Ruth had established it without telling me because she had not wanted me to worry, which was so precisely her. The Callahan Family Preservation Trust, irrevocable, established 4 years ago with the assistance of a trust attorney in Dayton. The primary asset was the house at 4 Sycamore Lane. The beneficiary, in the event of both our deaths, was not our daughter outright. It was a charitable remainder structure that would allow our daughter to receive income from the property for 10 years, after which the remainder would pass to a housing nonprofit that provided transitional homes for families leaving shelters. But the critical clause was this: the property could not be sold, transferred, or encumbered in any way without the written consent of the independent trustee, an attorney named Harold Finch, who had been Ruth's colleague's husband for 30 years, and who Ruth had known since before we were married. Troy had been trying to get me to sign over a house that had not been legally mine to sign over for 4 years. He had been hunting a ghost. I sat in the garage for a long time. A lot of things settled into place, the way things do when you finally see the shape of a situation plainly. I thought about my daughter, about the Troy she had chosen and the life she was trying to maintain, and what it had cost her to ask me to come and stay, what it had taken to sit beside me on the couch and hold my hand and say she was just thinking about my best interests. I thought about whether she had known exactly what Troy was doing or whether she had been told only enough to play her part. I did not know the answer. I still don't, fully. But I thought about the way she had looked in the kitchen doorway when Troy and I argued over the papers, the way her arms were crossed, holding herself together. I don't think she was entirely comfortable with what was happening. I think she was a woman who had made a series of small compromises and had traveled so far down that road that she could no longer see where it had started. I called Sandra back and told her what I had found. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Mr. Callahan, your wife was a very thorough woman." "She was," I said. "This changes the situation considerably," Sandra said. "What Troy presented to you was not just predatory," Sandra said. "What Troy presented to you was not just predatory. If he misrepresented the ownership of this property to a third-party financial company in order to execute this transaction, that is wire fraud. And if that company had claims they were counting on your property to back, they are going to want to know they've been defrauded." I told her I still did not want my daughter's husband prosecuted if there was a way to stop this without going that route. "There may be," she said, "but Roy, understand that this is likely not the only person he has done this to. The task force Lupe works with doesn't flag names for one complaint." I understood. I told her I needed a few days. She gave me 3. I drove back to my daughter's house. I told them everything had been fine at the house, just needed to water the plants. Troy was watching a game. My daughter was upstairs. I sat in the living room and I watched the television without seeing it. Over the next 2 days, I played the role they expected of me. I moved slowly. I asked my daughter what day it was once when I already knew, just to see the look she and Troy exchanged. That small, private look of confirmed assumption. I left my reading glasses on the kitchen counter and then looked for them in the wrong places for 5 minutes while Troy found them and handed them to me with a patient sigh. I became the image they had already decided I was. An old man getting a little foggy around the edges. Easy to manage, ready to let someone else handle things. It was the most controlled 2 days of my life. On the third morning, I called my daughter into the kitchen while Troy was in the shower. I poured her a cup of coffee and set it in front of her, and I sat down across from her, and I looked at her the way a father looks at a daughter when he needs her to hear him, not just listen. "I know what the papers are," I said. She went very still. "I had an attorney review them. I know what a quitclaim deed is, and I know what an equity stripping instrument is, and I know what the clause on page 22 means." I kept my voice even. "I also went back to Sycamore and I found your mother's trust documents." Something happened to her face that I have no precise word for. It was not guilt exactly, and it was not relief. It was more like the expression of someone who has been holding a position under pressure for a long time and has finally been given permission to let go. Her eyes filled. She didn't speak. "Your mother set up a trust," I said. "The house has been in it for 4 years. I cannot legally sign it over to anyone. Troy has been trying to get me to transfer something that doesn't belong to me to give." She put her hands flat on the table. "Dad," she said, and her voice broke on the word. I didn't know the details. I knew he wanted to talk to you about the house. He said it was for your benefit, an income stream. He needs money," I said. It was not a question. She looked at the table. "We're behind. On a lot of things. He made some investments that didn't work out, and there are people." She stopped. "He said if we could just get a bridge, just a short-term thing, that we'd be okay. He said you'd be better off anyway. That the house was just sitting there." I let that sit in the air between us for a moment. "Your mother knew," I said quietly. "Not about Troy specifically, but she knew that things happen, that people get desperate, that even people who love each other can do things they shouldn't when they're afraid. She set up that trust to protect us from all of it, including ourselves." My daughter was crying now, quietly, not the loud performative kind. Just tears running down her face the way rain runs down a window. "I'm not going to report Troy to the authorities," I said. "Not today, but I am going to have Sandra, the attorney, contact the company he was working with. They are going to find out that there is no asset to recover, that the property is protected, and that the transaction was initiated under false pretenses. That conversation is going to happen with or without my involvement, and when it does, Troy is going to have to deal with those people directly." I paused. "That is not going to be a pleasant experience." She nodded once, very slowly. "I need you to decide something," I said. "Not right now, but soon. Whether the life you're living is actually the life you want, or whether you've been carrying it because you didn't think you could put it down." I reached across the table and I held her hands. They were cold. "You are my daughter. That does not change. But I cannot keep you safe from choices you keep making. Only you can do that." I left that afternoon. I packed my bag and I hugged my daughter for a long time and I drove back to Sycamore. I unlocked the front door and I stood in the hallway again and the house settled around me the way a good pair of boots settles around your feet. Like something that belongs. I went out back and I looked at Ruth's garden. The tomato stakes were still there from last fall, bare now, just wooden sticks and black soil waiting for something to grow on them. I stood there until the light started to go golden low. Sandra filed the disclosure with the Ohio AG's Elder Fraud Unit 2 days later, naming the company and outlining the attempt. Troy's contact at the financial company received a certified letter within the week. I was not there to see Troy's face when he understood what had happened, when he realized the deal had never been real, that every move he had made was on a board where the most important piece had been removed before the game began. I heard from my daughter 3 weeks later. She was staying with a friend. They were talking. That was all she said, and I told her that was enough. I called Lupe and thanked her. She said not to thank her, that's what neighbors do. I told her that was a funny word for it since we live 40 minutes apart. She said that's what she called it anyway. I have thought about this a lot since it happened. About what Ruth did. She was sick, and she was tired, and she had enough to manage without adding this to it, but she spent time and money and energy with an attorney making sure that the house we built was protected from whatever might come, including things she couldn't name. She did not do it out of suspicion or fear. She did it out of love. She loved our daughter enough to create a container strong enough to hold the family even when the family started to lose its shape. That is the thing about people who build quietly. You don't always see what they've made until you need it. I still have the green folder in the second drawer. I take it out sometimes, not to read it, just to feel the weight of it. It is the last thing she completed that I did not know about while she was completing it. There is something about that I cannot fully explain. Something that feels less like grief and more like being still in conversation. Like she set a thing in motion before she left, and the motion is not stopped. I do not know what will happen with my daughter and her husband. I do not know if he will find his way back to something honest, or if the life he's been living will simply catch up with him in a way I cannot intercept. I hope he finds his way back. I hope she does. What I know is this. The house on Sycamore is still mine. Ruth's tomato stakes are still in the garden. And this spring I'm going to plant what she would have planted, and I'm going to do it the way she showed me, carefully, in the right soil, at the right time. That is the only thing I can be sure of growing correctly, and right now, that is enough. I keep thinking about that crack in the diner counter, the one somebody had filled with clear epoxy and tried to make disappear. You could still see it if you looked. You could still trace the whole length of it with your finger. That's the thing about damage. It doesn't vanish just because someone covers it over. It holds its shape underneath. Troy was a man who had spent years filling cracks with epoxy. The watch. The house. The presentation of a life that was winning, and I almost signed my name to the bottom of his story without reading it first. Not because I was foolish, because I loved my daughter, and love has a way of making you want to believe the version of things that hurts the least. What stopped me wasn't luck. It was a woman named Lupe, who had spent 20 years remembering permit numbers and contractor names, and who showed up at a diner counter at the right moment because she had made a habit of paying attention. The cause of what happened to Troy traces back further than any single decision he made. It goes back to the pattern he built, complaint by complaint, name by name, until the people whose job it is to watch for patterns finally had enough to see it. You can outrun a single consequence for a long time. You cannot outrun the accumulation of who you have chosen to be. And Ruth. I have thought about Ruth more in the months since this happened than I have in the 2 years since she passed, which I did not think was possible. She was sick and she was tired, and she sat down with a trust attorney anyway, because she understood something I am still learning, that the most important things you do for the people you love are often the things you do quietly, without announcement, while no one is watching. Not for credit, not for gratitude. Just because you could see what was coming, and you had the decency to build something that would hold. That is what I want to carry forward. Not the anger at Troy, which has mostly burned itself out into something closer to pity. Not the complicated grief of watching my daughter choose a life that cost her more than she knew. What I want to carry is Ruth's example. The kind of integrity that doesn't require an audience. The kind of clear-eyed thinking that looks at a situation honestly, even when honesty is inconvenient. Even when it would be easier to trust the surface of things. And a plain, stubborn willingness to do the hard thing anyway. To read the document. To make the call to drive back to Sycamore alone and open the second drawer. Those 3 things together. Doing right even when no one is watching. Thinking clearly even when you're being pressured to stop. And holding on even when your knees hurt and your hands are shaking. That combination is the only tool I know of that actually works when the world starts trying to take something from you. I planted tomatoes this spring. Not the same varieties Ruth grew because I couldn't remember all of them, but close. I put the stakes in the same spots. I watered them the way she showed me, slow and at the base, not overhead. They came up. That was enough.